My mother stood on my front porch for the first time in 9 years, holding a small carry-on suitcase and a folded piece of paper covered in neat blue handwriting. She looked older than I remembered, with more gray in her hair and deeper lines around her mouth, but she was still the same woman who had once controlled every corner of my childhood. I opened the door and stared at her, waiting for the words I had imagined hearing 1,000 times. I expected an apology. I expected her to say she was sorry for everything she had done. Maybe I even expected her to ask about my children, the grandchildren she had never met. Instead, she looked past me toward the beautiful house I had built with my husband and said, "We need to talk about the family's future." Then she unfolded the paper. It was a list. 5 carefully written demands, each one carrying a dollar amount beside it. The total was $925,000. At that moment, I realized something that hurt far more than her 9 years of silence ever had. My mother had not come back because she missed me. She had come back because my life had finally become valuable enough for her to want a piece of it. What my mother didn't know was that I had been keeping a list of my own. For 9 years, I had saved every birthday card she returned, every voicemail she ignored, every photograph of my children that came back through the mail, and every message my sister had sent to mutual friends about me. I had 29 items in total, all dated, labeled, and organized inside a navy blue 3-ring binder that stayed hidden in the bottom drawer of my desk. My mother had arrived with one sheet of paper explaining everything she wanted from me. I had a binder containing 9 years of proof explaining exactly why she no longer had the right to ask. Before I take you through the moment those 2 lists finally met on my kitchen table, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because if you've ever had someone abandon you when you had nothing, only to return when you finally had something they wanted, I think you're going to understand exactly why this story still stays with me. To understand how my mother ended up standing on my porch asking me for nearly $1 million, you have to go back to the summer I turned 24. I grew up in Millfield, Ohio, a tiny town where everyone knew everyone, and secrets rarely survived longer than a Sunday morning at church. There was one Baptist church, one barber shop, and one diner where every booth smelled like coffee and bacon grease. My father, Kenneth Archer, had worked at the lumber yard on Route 7 for 31 years. He was quiet, predictable, and proud of being dependable. He left for work at the same time every morning and came home at exactly 5:42 every evening. My mother, Diane, was the person everyone in town seemed to know. She ran our household with military precision and organized half the activities at church. She planned Easter brunches, coordinated prayer chains, assigned dishes for potlucks, and somehow always knew everybody's business. My younger sister Paige was 4 years younger than me, and she was everything I wasn't. She was loud, confident, beautiful, and naturally charming. She had been homecoming queen and somehow managed to look surprised when people voted for her. My mother adored her. My father called her Sunshine. I was the quiet daughter who got good grades, washed dishes without being asked, and never caused trouble. I don't say that because I hated Paige. I didn't. But I learned something very early about my family. Love seemed to have a budget, and Paige always received the biggest portion. If she needed something, my parents found a way to provide it. If I wanted something, I learned to earn it myself. When I was 18, I received a full scholarship to Ohio State. I became the first person in the Archer family to attend college, and for the first time, I felt like my life might become something bigger than Millfield. The morning I left, my mother packed my suitcase and slipped a card into one of the side pockets. I didn't find it until I arrived at my dorm. The card had flowers on the front, and inside my mother had written, "Come home soon. You belong here." I kept that card for 15 years. Even now, it sits in the same desk drawer as the navy binder. It was the last truly kind thing my mother ever wrote to me. College was also where I met Marcus Ellison. I was 21 when he sat 2 rows ahead of me in an advanced statistics class. He was studying engineering with a computer science minor, and he had a calm, methodical way of solving problems that immediately caught my attention. He didn't talk just to fill silence. He listened carefully, thought before answering, and somehow made people feel like their words mattered. Our first date was at a taco truck near campus. Marcus paid with crumpled dollar bills, I paid with quarters, and we split one horchata because neither of us had enough money to pretend we could afford two. We sat outside until the truck closed, talking about our dreams. Marcus told me he wanted to build something one day, something that solved a real problem. I told him I wanted a career where numbers meant something. He smiled and said that maybe we were both in the right field. We dated for 3 years before Marcus proposed. Our relationship wasn't flashy, but it was steady. We built trust slowly and learned how to rely on each other. Marcus met my parents twice during those 3 years. The first time, my mother smiled too widely and called him Michael instead of Marcus. The second time, she remembered his name but barely looked at him while speaking. I convinced myself she just needed time. I told myself that my family came from a small town and that people sometimes struggled with things they didn't understand. Paige was the only person who didn't let me hide from reality. At Thanksgiving, she leaned toward me and quietly warned me that Mom was never going to accept Marcus. I told her she was wrong because admitting she was right meant admitting that my own mother might force me to choose between the family I was born into and the man I loved. Marcus proposed on a Tuesday night at our tiny apartment. There was no expensive restaurant or dramatic proposal. We simply sat across from each other at our kitchen table while he held my hand and told me he wanted to spend his life with me. He wanted to build a future with me and asked if I would let him. I said yes before he even finished speaking. That night, I called my mother because I was still naive enough to believe that the person who raised me would be happy when I found happiness. Instead, there was silence on the phone. 7 long seconds passed before she finally said, "You need to think about what this means for this family." There was no congratulations. No excitement. Just a warning. My father got on the extension, cleared his throat twice, and said nothing. 2 days later, Paige texted me that our mother had been crying since I called and asked if I was happy now. I stared at the message, unable to understand how my happiness could possibly be something my sister considered an act of rebellion. 2 weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived from my mother. It was written on cream-colored stationery in her familiar blue ink. She explained that she couldn't support my decision and that I was choosing Marcus over my family. Then I reached the final paragraph, and everything inside me went cold. My mother wrote that if I went through with the marriage, I should not expect to walk back through their door. She said Marcus was not one of us and never would be. I read that sentence 3 times. My mother had drawn a line between me and the people I loved, and she expected me to stand on her side of it. I sat at the kitchen table holding that letter while my hands shook. I wanted to call her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her how the woman who once wrote, "You belong here," could now tell me that I didn't belong anywhere near her. But I did none of those things. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside a manila folder. I didn't know why I kept it. Something inside me simply said not to throw it away. We got married that June at the county courthouse. There were 12 guests, all friends or members of Marcus's family. His mother, Cora, flew in from Cleveland with a garment bag and a container of homemade pound cake. Before the ceremony, she pinned a silk flower to my dress, held both my hands, and welcomed me to the family. That simple sentence nearly broke my heart because it was exactly what I had wanted from my own mother. My dress had cost $160 from a consignment shop. Marcus wore a navy suit he had bought on clearance. There was no grand church ceremony, no expensive reception, and no father walking me down the aisle. There wasn't even an aisle. There was just a courthouse hallway, a judge who mispronounced our names, and a small Thai restaurant where we pushed 4 tables together afterward. But when I looked around at the people who had chosen to stand beside us, I knew we had something real. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the grocery store roses from our wedding. My hands were trembling, but not because I regretted marrying Marcus. I was shaking because I had just experienced one of the happiest days of my life, and the 2 people who had raised me hadn't cared enough to witness it. 1 week later, I mailed my parents a wedding photograph. On the back, I wrote that we were happy and that I hoped they could be happy for us someday. 11 days later, the photograph came back. A bright red stamp across the envelope said, "Return to sender." I stood in my apartment staring at those words until my eyes burned. Then I opened the manila folder, placed the photograph inside, and wrote in red pen, "Item 2. Wedding photograph returned." That was the beginning of the binder. The first year was the hardest. I called my mother 4 times, and every call went straight to voicemail. I left careful messages telling her that Marcus and I were doing well, that he had found a job, that I was studying for my CPA exam, and that I missed her. She never called back. I sent a birthday card. It came back. I sent another for my father's birthday. That came back too. Then Christmas came, and the card I mailed was returned with the same red stamp. My father sent me one text message during that entire year. It contained 4 words. "Your mother needs time." I stared at those words for a long time, wondering how much time a mother needed to accept her own daughter. Then Paige posted a photograph on Facebook. It showed my parents, Paige, and her boyfriend sitting together at a family dinner. The caption read, "Sunday dinner with my people." I wasn't in the picture. I hadn't been invited. I stared at the screen, feeling something inside me quietly break. Then I printed the screenshot. I wasn't trying to torture myself. I wanted proof. Every returned card, every unanswered call, every photograph became another piece of evidence that my family had made a decision to erase me. I began filing everything away. The manila folder became thicker until I eventually replaced it with a navy blue binder and created separate sections for each year. By the second year, Marcus decided to leave his job. He had been building a prototype in our garage at night, a compliance platform designed to help small businesses handle regulatory filings and financial audits without needing an expensive legal department. Marcus understood the technology, and I understood finance. Together, we saw an opportunity. He built the software while I created the pricing models, financial projections, and compliance checklists. Our garage became our office. There were 2 monitors, a cheap desk, a space heater, and a whiteboard Marcus bought at Goodwill for $12. Most nights, I came home from my analyst job, reheated whatever food we had left, and sat beside him until midnight. 7 months later, Compliance Core launched. We had 4 customers and a system that crashed twice on its first day. I remember staring at the error message while Marcus ran both hands through his hair. We had almost no money, no fancy office, and no investors, but we had each other. Somehow we laughed about it. We were building something that belonged to us, and nobody in my family could take that away. Around the same time, the binder grew. I added dividers for each year and continued numbering every incident. I wasn't planning revenge. At least that's what I told myself. I simply wanted to keep records because I knew that someday my children might ask why they didn't have grandparents on my side. I wanted to give them facts instead of anger. I didn't want them to hear only my version or their grandmother's version. I wanted them to know exactly what happened. Then Liam and Sophie were born. They arrived on a Wednesday morning in November, 6 pounds each, with identical dark curls. Sophie screamed for 4 hours straight while Liam slept through almost everything. Marcus cried when he held them. I had never seen him cry before. He stood beside the hospital window with one baby in each arm and whispered that they were going to know they were loved every single day. I looked at him and realized that whatever happened between me and my parents, I would never allow my children to grow up questioning whether they were wanted. Cora flew from Cleveland the next morning. She stayed for 2 weeks, cooked meals, cleaned the house, and rocked the babies in the middle of the night. She brought a handmade yellow and white blanket and silver bracelets engraved with their birth dates. That was what a grandmother looked like. My mother had received ultrasound photographs months earlier. She returned them. I sent birth announcements. Returned. I sent cards. Returned. Then I sent photographs of Liam sleeping on Marcus's chest and Sophie holding my finger. Those came back too. I filed them in the binder. Then Paige sent a message to someone we both knew from high school. That person sent me a screenshot. Paige had written, Her children don't have real grandparents. That is what she chose. I sat in the nursery holding Liam while Sophie slept nearby. I read the message again and again. My children did have a grandmother. Her name was Cora Ellison, and she flew across the country every 6 weeks to see them. She knew their favorite foods, their fears, their little habits, and the things that made them laugh. She had never once asked how much money we had. She had simply shown up. I printed Paige's message and placed it inside the binder. Item 16. At some point, I realized that the binder wasn't just a collection of painful memories anymore. It was a record of choices. Every returned card was a choice. Every ignored call was a choice. Every photograph sent back was a choice. My mother and father had been given countless opportunities to be part of my life, and each time they had chosen not to be. Meanwhile, Marcus and I kept building. Compliance Corps grew from a garage project into a real company. We hired employees and moved into an actual office. The twins grew up surrounded by people who loved them. Every night at 6:30, we sat down for dinner together. Cora visited every 6 weeks. The twins called her Grammy. She taught Liam how to make grilled cheese and taught Sophie the names of birds in our backyard. The silence from Ohio became part of the background of my life. It was still there, but I stopped allowing it to control me. I didn't cry anymore when my birthday passed without a call. I didn't check Facebook as often. I stopped wondering whether my mother might suddenly change her mind. I had learned to live without waiting for someone who had already decided to leave. Then, in our 7th year of marriage, everything changed. Compliance Corps landed a Series B worth $12 million, giving the company a post-money valuation of $68 million. Marcus and I still owned a significant share, and for the first time, the numbers were becoming serious. I left my analyst job and joined the company full-time as CFO. We bought a larger home. The twins started school. Our life became comfortable, stable, and successful. A small technology publication wrote about our company. 2 weeks later, a friend from Millfield sent me a message. She told me my mother had been asking about Marcus's company at church. I read the message 3 times. My mother had not spoken my name in 7 years. She didn't know what a Series B meant, but suddenly, she wanted to know. And that was the moment I realized the silence from my family might not last forever. Because the numbers were changing. And somewhere in Ohio, my mother had finally started paying attention. The message from my friend in Millfield stayed in my mind longer than I wanted to admit. My mother had spent 7 years pretending I didn't exist, yet now she was suddenly asking questions about my husband's company. She wanted to know what a Series B meant, how much the company was worth, and whether it was actually doing well. I tried to tell myself that curiosity was normal, but something in my stomach told me this wasn't curiosity. It was calculation. That same year, I sent my mother what I knew would probably be my last birthday card. I had sent one every year since she cut me off, even though every single one had come back. This time I included a photograph of Liam and Sophie at their school fall festival. They were wearing matching flannel shirts, and Liam had recently lost his 2 front teeth. On the back of the photograph, I wrote, "They ask about you sometimes. I tell them you live far away." I mailed the envelope and expected the usual red stamp. 9 days later, it came back, but this time, something was different. The envelope had been opened, the flap was creased, and someone had carefully resealed it with clear tape. The photograph was still inside, but now I knew someone in that house had taken it out and looked at my children's faces. I stood in my kitchen holding the envelope, staring at the damaged flap. My father had probably opened it. Maybe he had wanted to keep the photograph. Maybe he had wanted to see his grandchildren after all those years. But someone had decided it had to be returned. I placed it inside the binder and labeled it Item 23. That moment changed something inside me. For years, I had believed my father was simply following my mother's lead. But now I understood the difference between being powerless and choosing silence. My father could have called me. He could have driven to Portland. He could have opened the door. He had chosen not to. By the 8th year, Compliance Corps had grown to 80 employees, with offices in Portland and Austin. Marcus was featured on the cover of a regional business magazine, and the company appeared on a Forbes list of businesses to watch. The attention wasn't enormous, but it was enough for people to notice. Then I started seeing strange activity on my LinkedIn profile. Someone from Millfield, Ohio, had viewed my profile 3 times in 1 week. The account was private, so I couldn't see the name. A few weeks later, Marcus appeared on a fintech podcast, and my old friend Tess called me. Afterward, she told me my mother had said something at church. Diane had apparently told someone that she always knew Marcus was smart. I almost laughed when I heard that. Always knew. For 7 years, my mother had acted as if Marcus was the reason I no longer existed. Now, suddenly, she had always known he was smart. I didn't add that comment to the binder because it was hearsay, but I wrote it on a sticky note and placed it inside the front cover. That was when I realized my mother wasn't apologizing. She was rewriting history. Then came the group chat. One Monday evening, Tess called me and said Paige had accidentally added her to a family group chat. Tess stayed in the chat for 3 days before anyone realized she wasn't supposed to be there. During those 3 days, she took screenshots. When I opened the first screenshot, I felt my entire body go cold. My family wasn't talking about my childhood. They weren't talking about my wedding. They weren't talking about the grandchildren. They had never met. They were talking about money. Paige had written that Marcus's company had been valued at $68 million after the last funding round. She said she had been tracking the company's filings and believed an IPO could push the valuation much higher. My mother asked how they should approach me. Paige suggested making a list and being specific, because I was a numbers person. Then my mother asked how much they should request. Paige suggested starting with the mortgage, medical expenses, retirement, college tuition for her son, and monthly support. She even suggested they layer the request so it would look like a family investment instead of a financial demand. Then my mother wrote the sentence that destroyed any remaining doubt I had. She has more money than this entire town. She can afford to help her family. I sat in my car reading those screenshots while my son was playing soccer across the field. The dashboard clock showed 7:22. I looked through the windshield and watched Liam running after the ball, completely unaware that his grandmother had been studying his mother's finances like an opportunity. 9 years. 9 years of silence. 9 years of returned cards. 9 years of ignoring my children. And now they had a plan. Not an apology. A plan. I printed every screenshot and placed them inside the binder. Item 26 that night. After the twins were asleep, I showed everything to Marcus. He read the screenshots slowly and carefully. When he finished, he put the phone down and stared at the wall. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I thought about it. "Nothing yet," I said. "But I want to be ready." Marcus nodded. He didn't tell me what I should do. He didn't tell me to forgive them or confront them. He simply stood beside me, just as he had done every other time my family made me feel like I wasn't enough. The next morning, I called a family attorney named Grace. I didn't want to sue anyone. I simply wanted to know whether my parents had any legal ability to interfere with our finances or claim anything connected to our children's future. Grace explained that they had no legal standing. The trusts we were preparing would protect the twins' assets, and there was no realistic way my parents could force themselves into our financial lives. Before hanging up, Grace said something that stayed with me. "You don't need a lawyer for the personal part of this," she told me. "You need to decide what you're willing to say." She was right. This wasn't going to be a legal battle. It was going to be a personal one. A few months later, the IPO process began. Investment bankers came to Portland. Lawyers reviewed every document. Marcus handled the technology and product side while I handled the financials and SEC filings. For 7 exhausting months, we lived inside spreadsheets, conference rooms, and endless meetings. During that time, we finalized trusts for Liam and Sophie. 2 irrevocable trusts. Protected, separate, untouchable. I remember signing those documents and asking the attorney what would happen if a family member ever tried to claim access to the money. Nothing, she said. That was the point. Went home that evening and put the documents in the fire safe under our bed. Then the silence from Millfield suddenly became complete. No LinkedIn views, no messages from Tess, no church gossip, nothing. It felt strange, almost too quiet. 2 months before the IPO, Paige texted me. It was the first direct message I had received from her in 9 years. Hey, just thinking about you. How are the kids? I stared at those words. How are the kids? As if she had been asking all along, as if 9 years hadn't happened. I didn't answer for a week. Then she sent another message saying she would be in Portland for work and would love to see me. I agreed to meet her at a cafe, not my house, not somewhere, private dot a public place. Paige arrived 15 minutes late, wearing a blazer and ankle boots. She hugged me for far too long and told me I looked amazing several times. Then she started asking questions. How big was our house? Did the kids attend private school? How many employees did Compliance Corps have? Was Marcus still running the company? Had we raised more money? What neighborhood did we live in? She asked question after question, and I began counting. 32 questions. Not one was an apology. Not one was, I missed you. Not one was, I'm sorry I abandoned you. Then I noticed her phone. She had angled it toward the parking lot. She was photographing my car. I watched her. Quietly, she was collecting information, cataloging my life, building the report my mother had asked for, answered her questions vaguely and politely. When we said goodbye, she hugged me again and told me we should do this more often. I watched her walk away. Then I drove home. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out the navy binder. I added another item. 28, reconnaissance visit. 32 questions. Vehicle photographed. No apology. Then I called Grace. They're coming, I told her. Who? My mother. Grace was quiet. What makes you think that? I told her everything about the group chat, the financial planning, Paige's visit, and the questions. Grace sighed. Iris, you don't need me to prepare for this. You need to decide what you want to say when she arrives. I already knew I didn't need a speech. I had the binder, 28 items, 9 years, every returned card, every ignored voicemail, every photograph, every message, every piece of evidence that my family had chosen to erase me. The binder would speak for itself. Then in October, Compliance Corps went public. Marcus and I stood on the NASDAQ floor in New York as the company opened at $18 a share. By noon, it had reached 20. By the end of the day, the company's market cap was approximately 440 million Marcus, and I suddenly had a paper net worth of around $44 million. I remember looking at the number and thinking it couldn't possibly be real. Checked the calculations. Then I checked them again. The numbers were correct. We had actually done it. That night, Marcus and I celebrated with room service in our hotel room, while the twins stayed in Portland with Cora. Marcus fell asleep on the couch before 10, exhausted from everything we had been through. I stayed awake because I knew what was coming. My phone showed 5 missed calls from Millfield. 3 were from unknown numbers. 1 was from my father. 1 was from my mother. I didn't call back. The next morning, my father's voicemail arrived. His voice sounded older than I remembered. Baby girl, I saw you on the news. You and Marcus on the stock exchange floor. I didn't know what to say, so I just wanted to call. I'm proud of you. Your mother wants to talk. She has things she wants to discuss. Please call her when you can. I love you, Iris. I played the voicemail 3 times. Baby girl. He hadn't called me that since I was 14, and for a few seconds, I felt the little girl inside me who had spent years waiting for those words. Then reality returned. My father hadn't called after my wedding. He hadn't called after my children were born. He hadn't called when my Birthday cards were returned. He hadn't called when my mother erased me. He called after the IPO. After the $44 million I saved the voicemail. I didn't put it in the bin der. It was too sad. 2 days later, my mother texted me. It was a long, carefully written message about lost time, family, and how life was too short to let differences divide us. I read it twice. Then I noticed what was missing. There was no "I'm sorry." There was no "I was wrong." There was no mention of the wedding. No mention of the returned cards. No mention of my children. Nothing about the 9 years she had deliberately erased me. Instead, she wrote about the differences that divide us, as if what happened between us had simply been a disagreement. As if she hadn't told me that Marcus would never be one of us. I printed the message. Then I opened the binder. Item 29, first text from Diane in 9 years, 63 words, 0 apologies. Closed the binder. And that's when I knew the next chapter was about to begin. Because my mother wasn't asking to reconnect, she was coming to collect, and this time, I was ready to open the door. My mother arrived in Portland on a rainy Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after sending me that carefully worded message about family and lost time. She didn't call me when her plane landed. Instead, she checked into a hotel downtown and waited until the following afternoon to send me her address. The message was simple. I'm in town. I think it's time we talked. I stared at my phone for almost a full minute before replying that she could come to my house the next morning. I could have met her somewhere public, but I wanted her to see the life she had chosen to miss. I wanted her to walk through the front door and understand that the daughter she had discarded had not fallen apart without her. I had built something beautiful. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The house was quiet, and rain tapped gently against the bedroom windows. Marcus was already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed and watching me. He knew I hadn't slept much. I had spent most of the night thinking about the woman who was coming to my home. For 9 years, I had imagined what I would say if my mother ever returned. Sometimes I imagined screaming at her. Sometimes I imagined crying. Sometimes I imagined telling her to leave before she could say a word. But now that the moment had actually arrived, I felt strangely calm. I wasn't the 24-year-old woman who had once sat at a kitchen table holding a rejection letter with shaking hands. I was 40 years old, a mother, a wife, and the CFO of a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. My mother had changed the circumstances around me, but she hadn't changed me. At 10:17 that morning, a black SUV stopped outside our house. I watched from the upstairs window as my mother stepped out. She was wearing a beige cardigan and carrying a small suitcase. For a moment, I felt something unexpected. She looked fragile, older, smaller than the woman I remembered. Then I saw my father step out of the passenger side, and the old anger returned. He had come too. They had traveled across the country together, yet neither of them had bothered to tell me he was coming. My mother looked up at the house, and my father stood beside her with his hands in his coat pockets. They stayed there for several seconds before walking toward the front door. Marcus came downstairs with me. He didn't stand beside me when I opened the door. He stayed several feet behind, giving me space to decide how I wanted to handle the moment. I opened it and my mother looked directly into my eyes. For 1 second, nobody spoke. Then she smiled. "Hi, baby girl." Those 3 words hit me harder than I expected. I felt my throat tighten, and for half a second I was 14 years old again, sitting at our old kitchen table, waiting for my mother to tell me I had done something right. Then I remembered the voicemail from my father after the IPO. I remembered the timing. I remembered the $44 million. The feeling passed. "Hi, Mom," I said. My father stepped forward and tried to hug me. I allowed it because I didn't want to make a scene, but my arms stayed at my sides. He smelled like the same aftershave he had worn my entire childhood. That familiar scent brought back memories I hadn't expected to feel. For a moment, I remembered sitting on his shoulders at the county fair. I remembered him teaching me to ride a bicycle. I remembered him coming home from work covered in sawdust. Then I remembered that he had spent 9 years choosing not to call me. My mother stepped inside and looked around. Her eyes moved across the foyer, the staircase, the large windows overlooking the backyard. She noticed everything: the furniture, the artwork, the expensive chandelier above the entrance. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about the children. She simply looked. "Beautiful house," she said. "Thank you." My father nodded toward the staircase. "The kids here?" "They're at school," my mother smiled. "We'd love to meet them." I looked at her. Maybe. Her smile disappeared for half a second, but she recovered quickly. We walked into the kitchen. I had deliberately chosen the largest room in the house because I didn't want anyone feeling trapped. The kitchen had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden, and the long marble island could comfortably seat 10 people. My mother sat on one side. My father sat beside her. Marcus stood near the coffee machine. I offered them coffee. My mother accepted, my father declined. Then there was silence. It was strange how much silence could exist between people who had once shared the same house. Mother finally reached into her purse and pulled out the folded piece of paper. I recognized the blue ink immediately. She placed it on the marble countertop. "I know this is difficult," she said, "but your father and I have been thinking about the future." I looked at the paper, then at her. "What future?" My mother took a breath. "The family's future." I almost smiled. "Which family?" My father looked uncomfortable. "Iris," he said quietly. "We're trying to make things right." I looked at him. "After 9 years?" He lowered his eyes. My mother immediately interrupted. "We didn't come here to argue about the past. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. They didn't want to discuss the past because the past was the one thing they couldn't manipulate." Leaned back in my chair. "Then why are you here?" My mother unfolded the paper. The list contained 5 items. The first was their mortgage. They had apparently refinanced their house years earlier and were struggling with the payments. The second was my father's medical expenses. The third was my mother's retirement fund. The fourth was money for Paige's son's college tuition. The fifth was a monthly family support payment. I stared at the list. The total was $925,000. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. My mother watched my face. "I know it seems like a lot," she said. "But when you consider what you and Marcus have, it's really not." Marcus's expression changed. My father looked at the floor. I picked up the paper. "You came here to ask me for $925,000? My mother frowned. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" "It's family helping family." I looked at her. "Family?" She nodded. "Yes." I slowly folded the paper. "Mom, you told me 9 years ago that I was no longer part of your family." She looked away. I was upset. "You told me Marcus would never be one of us." I didn't mean it like that. "You returned every birthday card I sent." "You?" I needed space. "You returned pictures of your grandchildren." My mother's face tightened. I didn't know how to handle everything. I looked at my father. "Did you?" He didn't answer. I turned back to my mother. "You ignored me for 9 years. You ignored my wedding. You ignored the birth of my children. You returned every attempt I made to contact you. Then my company goes public, and suddenly you remember that I'm your daughter." My mother looked offended. "That's incredibly unfair." I laughed once. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes when something is so absurd that your brain doesn't know how else to react. "Unfair?" My mother leaned forward. "We didn't come here because of money." I looked at the paper between us. "Then why did you bring this?" She didn't answer. My father finally spoke. "Your mother thought it would be a practical way to start rebuilding." I looked at him. "By asking me for $925,000? He rubbed his forehead. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." I turned toward Marcus. He hadn't said a word. He didn't need to. He had already heard everything. My mother folded her arms. "You're making this much more dramatic than it needs to be." That was the moment. Something inside me finally went quiet. I stood. Up. Wait here. My mother looked confused. I walked. Upstairs to my office, then I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. The navy binder was still there. 9 years, 29. Items, I carried it downstairs. When I returned to the kitchen, I placed it on the marble island. My mother stared at it. What is that? I opened the cover. Your family's future. I turned to the first tab. Year 1. I pulled out the first document. Birthday. Card returned. Then the second. Wedding. Photograph returned. Then the third. Christmas card returned. My mother's expression changed. I continued. Year 2. Birthday card returned. Father's Day card returned. Phone call unanswered. My father slowly lifted his head. Year 3. Ultrasound photographs returned. My mother's face went pale. 4. Birth announcement returned. I kept going. Year 5. Photograph of Liam and Sophie returned. My mother reached toward the binder. I moved it. Away. Don't. She froze. I turned another. Page. Year 6. Page's message about my children not having real grandparents. Page's name changed my father's expression. What message? I looked at him. You should ask her. My mother immediately said, Page was upset. She was telling the truth. No, she wasn't. I turned the binder around and pushed the screenshot toward them. My mother read the message. My father read it after her. Neither spoke. Turned another page. Year 7. Group chat. My mother looked up. What group chat? The one where you and Paige discussed my finances. Her face changed completely. For the first time since arriving, my mother looked genuinely frightened. My father looked at her. What is she talking about? My mother didn't answer. Reached into the binder and pulled out the printed screenshots. I placed them on the table, one by one. Page. Discussing the company's valuation. Page. Suggesting how much money they should request. My mother asking how to approach me. My mother saying I had more money than the entire town. My father's hands began to shake. I didn't know about this. I looked at him. Maybe you should have. My mother stood abruptly. Where? Did you get those? Does it matter? Those were private conversations. So was my life. She stared at me. You've been collecting all this? Yes. For what? I looked at her. To remember the truth. My mother shook her head. This is sick. No. My voice was calm. This is documentation. Marcus finally spoke. She's not threatening you. Diane, she's showing you what happened. My mother turned toward him. You've poisoned her against us. Marcus looked genuinely surprised. She was 24. When you abandoned her, my mother's face hardened. This is why I never wanted her with you. I felt the words hit me. But this time they didn't hurt. They confirmed everything. 9 years had passed. My mother had crossed the country. She had entered my home. She had asked me for $925,000, and when confronted with the evidence of what she had done, she still blamed Marcus. I closed the binder. You should leave. My father looked at me. Iris. No. My voice remained steady. You don't get to come into my home after 9 years. Ask me for nearly $1 million and then insult my husband when I refuse. My mother grabbed the list. You haven't even considered helping us. I considered it. She looked surprised. When? Every time I sent you a card. Every time I called. Every time I sent photographs of my children. Every time I wondered if you were okay. Her eyes filled with tears. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered that my children were now old enough to understand what rejection felt like, and I knew I couldn't teach them that love meant accepting whatever treatment someone gave you just because they were family. My mother started crying. I was your mother. I looked at her. Yes, she waited. I continued. And you chose not to be. The kitchen became completely silent. My father stood slowly. He looked at the binder, then at me, then at the $1,925,000 list. Iris, I'm sorry. I believed him. That was the worst part. I believed that my father was sorry, but sorry wasn't the same as undoing. I shook my head. I believe you. He looked relieved. Then I added, but I don't owe you anything. The relief disappeared. Oh. Mother stared at me as if she had finally realized something. The money was never going to be hers. Not the mortgage, not the retirement fund, not the college tuition, nothing. She had spent 9 years believing that I would eventually return to her because I needed her. She had never imagined that one day she would need me. And now that day had arrived. I walked them to the door. Before leaving, my father turned toward me. Can I see the kids? I looked at him. Why? His eyes filled with tears. Because they're my grandchildren. I thought about Cora. I thought about the years she had spent showing up. I thought about my children asking why they didn't have grandparents on my side. Then, I looked at my father. You can ask me again when you've earned the right. He nodded slowly. My mother said nothing. They walked down the porch steps. I closed the door. Then I stood there for several seconds, with my hand still resting on the doorknob, expected to feel victorious. I didn't. I felt tired. 9 years of anger had finally reached its destination. And the destination wasn't revenge. It was clarity. But the story wasn't over. Because the next morning, I received an email from Paige. She had apparently seen the screenshots, and she wasn't apologizing. She was furious. She accused me of humiliating our parents, manipulating private conversations, and destroying the family. Then she wrote one final sentence. You'll regret treating Mom and Dad this way when they're gone. I read it twice. Then I forwarded the email to Grace. After that, I opened the navy binder one final time. I looked at the 29 items. Then I added a new page. Item 30. They came back. I closed the binder. But this time, I didn't put it back in the drawer. I left it on my desk because I finally understood that the binder wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about remembering who I had been before they came back. And more importantly, it was about remembering who I had become without them. The email from Paige arrived 3 days after my parents left Portland, and I could tell from the first sentence that she had no intention of apologizing. She accused me of humiliating our parents, exposing private family conversations, and treating them like strangers after everything they had supposedly done for me. She wrote that I had become arrogant because of money, and that I was punishing our entire family simply because I had never gotten over something that happened when I was young. Then she ended the message by warning me that I would regret treating our parents this way when they were gone. I read it several times, but instead of feeling angry, I felt strangely calm. Paige was still doing exactly what she had always done. She was taking the consequences of their choices and placing the blame on me. I didn't respond to her email. Instead, I forwarded it to Grace, my attorney, and asked her to keep it with the other documentation. I had no intention of using the information to destroy my family, but I also wasn't going to allow anyone to rewrite the past. Grace called me later that afternoon and said there was something I needed to understand. My parents had no legal claim to our company, our shares, or the money we had earned. They couldn't force us to support them, and they couldn't touch the trusts we had established for Liam and Sophie. But there was one thing I couldn't protect myself from with legal documents, and that was emotional manipulation. Grace told me that if I wanted peace, I needed to stop trying to convince my family that they had hurt me. People who refuse to accept responsibility rarely change because you present them with more evidence. Sometimes they simply become more creative at explaining why everything was your fault. That evening, I sat in my office looking at the navy binder. For years, I had believed that the binder represented my pain. But now I realized it represented something else. It represented all the moments when I had tried to reconnect, and all the moments when they had chosen not to. My parents had been given 9 years to change their minds. They could have called me on my birthday. They could have sent a card to my children. They could have shown up at my door at any point. Instead, they had waited until our company became successful and then appeared with a list demanding $925,000. I finally understood that I didn't need to punish them. Their own choices had already created the punishment. They had missed 9 years of my life, 9 years of Marcus's life, and 9 years of their grandchildren's childhood. I couldn't give those years back to them even if I wanted to. A week later, my mother called again. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Her voice sounded different this time. She wasn't angry and she wasn't crying. She sounded tired. She told me that my father had been struggling since we left them at the airport and that he had been talking about me constantly. I listened quietly as she explained that he wanted another chance to meet the children. Then she said something that made me sit up straight. She said they weren't asking for money anymore. I asked her what she meant, and she said that after everything that had happened, she realized the money conversation had been a mistake. She said they wanted to focus on rebuilding the family first. For the first time, I considered believing her. I asked if she was willing to explain why they had come to Portland with a financial request after 9 years of silence. There was a long pause on the other end of the phone. Then she said that they had been scared. My father's health wasn't good. Their finances were unstable, and Paige had been struggling with her son's tuition. They had watched my company grow and convinced themselves that I was the only person who could save them. She admitted that they had started thinking about my money before they ever thought about me. I closed my eyes when I heard that. It was painful, but there was something strangely freeing about finally hearing the truth from her own mouth. I asked her one question. I wanted to know whether she would still have contacted me if Compliance Corps had failed. My mother didn't answer immediately. The silence lasted long enough for me to know the answer before she spoke. Finally, she said she didn't know. I thanked her for being honest and ended the call. Marcus found me sitting at the kitchen island afterward. I told him everything, and he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked what I wanted to do. I told him I didn't know. Part of me wanted to shut the door forever. Another part of me wondered whether people really could change after so many years. Marcus reminded me that forgiveness didn't mean giving someone access to my life. I could forgive my parents and still keep boundaries. I could allow them to apologize without pretending the past never happened. Most importantly, I could decide what relationship, if any, they deserved based on their actions from that point forward. So I sent my mother a message with one condition. If she wanted to see me again, she could come alone. No page, no list, no financial discussion, no expectations. Just her and me, sitting somewhere neutral, talking about what had actually happened. She agreed. We met at a small restaurant near downtown 3 weeks later. My mother arrived early and was already sitting at the table when I walked in. She looked nervous. I had never seen her nervous before. For most of my childhood, she had been the person who walked into a room and immediately took control of it. Now she sat with both hands wrapped around a glass of water, staring at the table. I sat across from her, and for several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she looked at me and said she was sorry. Not a general apology, not an apology for what happened. She apologized for specific things. She was sorry she hadn't attended my wedding. She was sorry she had rejected Marcus. She was sorry she had ignored my calls. She was sorry she had returned the photographs of my children. She was sorry she had allowed 9 years to pass without meeting them. I listened to every word. Then she said the sentence I had waited nearly a decade to hear. She admitted that she had been wrong. I felt tears fill my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I had imagined this moment so many times that I thought it would feel like victory. It didn't. It felt like grief. I suddenly realized that the apology I had spent years waiting for couldn't repair the damage. It could acknowledge the wound, but it couldn't erase the scar. I told my mother that I believed she was sorry, but I couldn't pretend everything was fixed. She nodded. Then I asked her why she had treated Marcus the way she did. She said she had been afraid of losing control over me. She had always believed that I would eventually come home, marry someone she approved of, and build the kind of life she understood. When I chose Marcus, she felt like she was losing her daughter. Instead of admitting that fear, she turned it into anger. She told herself that Marcus had taken me away from her, when the truth was that I had simply grown up. That was the first honest explanation she had ever given me. I asked her whether she loved me during those 9 years. She looked directly at me and said yes. I asked her why she didn't call. She started crying and said that every year she convinced herself she would call next month, then next birthday, then next Christmas. Eventually, so much time had passed that she became ashamed and didn't know how to return. I listened, but I didn't let her explanation erase the consequences. I told her that I had spent 9 years wondering whether my own mother loved me enough to pick up the phone. She reached across the table, but I didn't take her hand. I told her that if she wanted to know my children, she had to earn their trust slowly. She couldn't walk into their lives as if she had been there all along. She couldn't demand the title of grandmother simply because she was biologically related to them. She had to show up. She had to be consistent. She had to accept that they already had a grandmother who had been there for every birthday, every school play, and every difficult night. My mother nodded. Then she asked if she could meet them. I thought about it for a long time before agreeing. 2 weeks later, my parents came back to Portland. This time, there was no suitcase full of financial demands. There was no list. My father brought a box of homemade cookies, and my mother brought 2 small gifts she had wrapped herself. I told them not to expect anything from the children and to let them decide how comfortable they wanted to be. When Liam and Sophie walked into the room, they stopped immediately. My parents stood near the fireplace looking nervous and uncertain. My father had tears in his eyes. My mother smiled, but her hands were shaking. The twins looked at them, then looked at me. I told them that these were their grandparents and that they could say hello if they wanted. Sophie walked over first. She asked my mother if she was the grandmother from Ohio. My mother started crying. I watched. Sophie hugged her, and something inside my chest loosened. Liam was slower. He stayed beside me for several minutes before approaching my father. My father knelt down and asked him about soccer. Within 20 minutes, the room sounded different. There was laughter. The twins were showing my parents their toys, and my father was telling them stories about the town where I grew up. I stood in the doorway and watched. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a miracle. It was simply a beginning. But then my mother made one mistake. She asked Sophie whether she wanted to visit Ohio for Christmas. Sophie looked confused. I immediately stepped in and explained that they weren't ready for that yet. My mother nodded, but I could see disappointment on her face. Later that evening, she asked me privately why I was still keeping them at a distance. I told her, because trust wasn't a light switch. She had turned it off for 9 years. She couldn't expect me to turn it back on in one afternoon. My mother didn't argue. That was progress. Over the next 6 months, my parents visited 3 more times. They never asked for money again. They never mentioned the company. They never asked about our investments. They simply showed up and tried to build relationships with the children. My father was especially consistent. He called every Sunday evening. Sometimes the conversations lasted 5 minutes. Sometimes they lasted an hour. He asked about the twins' school. He asked about Marcus. He asked about my work. He never pressured me to forget the past. My mother struggled more. She wanted everything to happen quickly. She wanted to be forgiven immediately. She wanted the old family restored. But every time she pushed too hard, I reminded her that rebuilding was going to take time. Then something unexpected happened. My father became seriously ill. It was a Sunday morning when I received the call. My mother was crying so hard that I could barely understand her. My father had collapsed at home and had been taken to the hospital. The doctors believed he had suffered a major cardiac event. I drove there immediately. When I entered his hospital room, he looked smaller than I remembered. He was connected to monitors and his skin looked pale. He opened his eyes when I walked in. "Iris," he whispered. I took his hand. For the first time in 9 years, I was holding my father's hand without feeling angry. He apologized again. This time, I stopped him. I told him he didn't need to apologize while lying in a hospital bed. He squeezed my hand, then he said something that I will never forget. "Should have protected you." I looked at him. He told me that when my mother rejected Marcus, he had disagreed with her privately, but didn't have the courage to stand against her. He said he had convinced himself that staying quiet would prevent the family from falling apart. Instead, his silence had destroyed his relationship with his daughter. He started crying. "I thought I was keeping the peace," he said. "I was just choosing the easier side. I had spent years wondering whether my father truly understood what he had done. Now I knew." Leaned forward and hugged him. It wasn't forgiveness. Not completely, but it was something close. My father survived the heart attack, but the experience changed him. He stopped allowing my mother to control every conversation. He started speaking honestly. He admitted that he had been afraid of conflict for most of his life, and that his fear had cost him his daughter. Then, Paige came to Portland. I hadn't spoken to her since her angry email. She arrived without warning and asked to see me. I almost refused, but something told me I needed to hear what she had to say. She sat across from me in my office, and for the first time in our entire lives, there was no competition between us. No comparison. No parents standing behind us, just two sisters. Paige looked exhausted. She admitted that she had been jealous of me for years. She said she had always believed I was the responsible one, the successful one, the daughter who could do anything. She said she hated the fact that our parents praised her while secretly depending on me. When Compliance Corps became successful, she realized that I had built the life she had always wanted. Then she admitted something else. She had been the one who encouraged our mother to ask for the $925,000 I already knew, but hearing her say it still hurt. I asked her why. She said she thought I owed the family something because I had escaped while everyone else stayed behind. She believed I had taken my success and left them to struggle. She didn't understand that I hadn't escaped. I had simply survived. I told her that I didn't owe anyone the life I had built. Not my parents, not her, not anyone. Paige started crying. For the first time, I saw my sister not as the golden child, not as the person who had always received more attention, but as another person damaged by the same family system that had hurt me in a different way. I didn't forgive her that day, but I told her she could try again. She nodded, and then she left. That night, I returned to my office and looked at the Navy binder, 30 items, 9 years. But now there were new pages. My father's apology, my mother's apology, the first visit with the twins, the Sunday phone calls, the hospital pages, confession. I stared at those pages for a long time. Then I realized something. The binder had started as evidence of everything my family had done to me, but now it had become evidence of something else. People could change. Not everyone deserved another chance, but some people could finally understand the damage they had caused. The real revenge had never been making my family suffer. The real revenge was building a life so complete that their rejection could no longer define me. And when they finally returned, I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. They were the ones waiting for mine. For the first time in 9 years, my family was slowly becoming part of my life again, but I refused to pretend that everything was suddenly perfect. My parents had apologized, Paige had admitted what she had done, and my father had begun calling every Sunday, but trust still had to be rebuilt one day at a time. I made it clear that none of them would receive money from me simply because we were related. If I ever chose to help someone, it would be because I genuinely wanted to, not because they believed my success created a debt I owed them. My parents eventually accepted that boundary. And that was when I knew something had truly changed. 6 months after my father's heart attack, I invited everyone to our house for Thanksgiving. It was the first time my entire family had sat around one table in almost a decade. Cora was there too, and I watched my mother thank her for being the grandmother she hadn't been able to become. That moment was difficult for everyone, but it was honest. My mother didn't try to replace Cora, and Cora didn't treat her like an enemy. They simply understood that the children had enough love for both of them. Across the table, Liam and Sophie were laughing with their grandparents, completely unaware of how many years it had taken to reach that moment. After dinner, my mother asked if she could see the navy binder. I hesitated before bringing it downstairs. She held it carefully and turned through the pages, reading the dates and looking at the returned photographs. When she reached the final pages, she began to cry. She told me that seeing everything together made her understand something she hadn't understood before. The 9 years hadn't disappeared just because she was sorry. They were still 9 years, 9 birthdays, 9 Christmases, 9 years of watching my children grow through photographs she had refused to accept. I told her that I couldn't give those years back. Nobody could, but I also told her that the future was still unwritten. If she wanted to be part of our lives, she could start there. She didn't need to pay me back for the past, and I didn't need her to erase it. I simply needed her to stop running from it. The following spring, Marcus and I established a scholarship through Compliance Corps for students from small towns who wanted to study technology or finance. We named it after my father, not because he had been perfect, but because he had finally admitted where he had failed. The first scholarship went to a young woman from Millfield who had been accepted into Ohio State but couldn't afford the remaining tuition. When I read her application, I saw a younger version of myself. She was smart, ambitious, and terrified that her circumstances would decide her future. I funded the scholarship personally. My mother asked why I was willing to give money to a stranger but not to my own family. I told her the difference was simple. The student had never abandoned me and then returned with a bill. My mother smiled sadly. "I deserved that," she said. "Yes," I replied. But that's not why I said it. By then, the company had continued growing, and Marcus and I had more money than we could ever realistically spend. We could have bought anything we wanted, but the most valuable thing we had gained wasn't money. It was freedom. We could choose who belonged in our lives. We could decide what kind of parents we wanted to be. We could give our children something I had spent most of my life searching for: the certainty that love would never be conditional on success. A year after my parents first arrived in Portland asking for $925,000, my mother came to me with a completely different request. She asked if I would help her organize a family reunion in Millfield. She wanted to bring everyone together, not to ask for anything, but simply to acknowledge that our family had survived something painful. I agreed, but I told her there was one condition. Nobody was allowed to pretend the past hadn't happened. The reunion was held in the same church where my mother had once told people that she had always known Marcus was smart. I walked into that building with my husband and children beside me, and for a moment, I remembered being 24 years old and leaving that same town believing I had lost my entire family. Now I was returning with a family of my own. My father stood at the entrance waiting for me. He hugged me tightly and whispered that he was proud of me. This time, I believed him without wondering what he wanted in return. My mother hugged me next, and when she pulled away, she looked at Marcus and thanked him for loving me when she couldn't. Marcus simply nodded and told her that I had been easy to love. That sentence made my mother cry. Later that evening, Paige approached me. She had changed too. She wasn't competing with me anymore. She had started working again and was paying her son's tuition herself. She told me that for the first time in her life, she was trying to build something without expecting someone else to rescue her. I told her I was proud of her. It felt strange saying it, but it also felt right. Before we left, my mother asked me if I still had the binder. I told her yes. She asked if I was still adding to it. I smiled. No. She looked relieved. Then I told her I had moved it. Where? Into the attic, she laughed softly. Why not throw it away? I thought about that question for a moment before answering. I told her that the binder wasn't something I needed to destroy. It was part of my history. Throwing it away wouldn't change what happened, just like keeping it wouldn't give me control over the past. I kept it because I wanted to remember the person I had been when I thought rejection meant I wasn't worthy of love. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that I had survived. That was the real ending to my revenge story. My mother had once rejected me because she believed I wasn't choosing the life she wanted for me. Then, 9 years later, she returned because she believed my life had become valuable enough to deserve her attention. She came expecting money, but what she found instead was a daughter who no longer needed her approval. The most satisfying part wasn't watching her realize she couldn't have the $925,000. It wasn't seeing her shocked expression when I opened the binder. It wasn't even watching her understand that the family she had abandoned had continued without her. The real revenge was that I had built a life she couldn't take credit for. Marcus and I had created our company from a garage with 2 monitors and a $12 whiteboard. We had raised 2 children who knew exactly what it meant to be loved. We had built friendships, created opportunities for strangers, and surrounded ourselves with people who showed up because they wanted to, not because they expected something in return. My parents eventually became part of that life, but they became part of it on my terms, not theirs. I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't making someone suffer. Sometimes it's becoming so strong that the person who once made you feel worthless no longer has the power to define your value. My mother thought she was coming back because I had finally become successful. She was wrong. I had been valuable long before the company was worth millions. I had been valuable when I was 24, sitting alone at a kitchen table with a wedding photograph that had been returned to me. I had been valuable when I sent birthday cards that nobody wanted. I had been valuable when my children were born and their grandmother refused to meet them. My success didn't create my worth. It simply made it impossible for them to ignore. Today, my parents are still in our lives. The relationship isn't perfect, and I don't think it ever will be. Some wounds don't disappear just because people apologize. But my father calls every Sunday, my mother visits several times a year, and my children know them as grandparents. Paige and I speak regularly, and our relationship is healthier now that neither of us is trying to compete for our parents' approval. I still keep boundaries and I still remember everything that happened, but I no longer carry the anger the way I once did. The navy binder is still in my attic. I haven't opened it in years. Sometimes I think about throwing it away, but then I remember what it represents. It reminds me that I survived being rejected by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. It reminds me that I built a life without waiting for permission. And most importantly, it reminds me that when my mother finally came back asking for $925,000, the greatest thing I could give her wasn't money. It was the truth. She had spent 9 years believing that I needed her. In the end, she was the one who needed me, and I was finally strong enough to decide whether she deserved another chance. If you've ever been rejected, underestimated, or abandoned by someone who later came back because your life had changed, remember this: you don't owe anyone access to the person you became while they were gone. People can apologize, and sometimes they can change, but forgiveness should never require you to forget the pain that taught you how to survive. If this story connected with you, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe for more emotionally powerful revenge stories, and tell us in the comments what you would have done if you were in my position. Would you have given your family the money, forgiven them immediately, or made them earn their way back into your life?